Hey ladies, welcome back to the Finding Joy in Your Home podcast. I am your host, Jami, and I am here talking about one of my favorite subjects, which of course is reading. All right, we have not done a reading update in a very, very long time. I have really been enjoying my reading this year, and I have found that when I am trying to read more, you can get stuck in one of two modes. You can get stuck in a rut where you're not reading very much, where you're not picking up books, you're not going through them. And the other mode that you can get stuck in is the positive one, where when you are reading and you're enjoying books, you're just picking up the next one and you're reading more and more, almost by accident, because you're moving through some really good books. And I have found myself lately moving through some really good books. I have picked some really good ones that has been motivating to want to pick up the next book and read. So today I'm going to give you a couple of reading tips, and then I'm going to go through some current books I've been reading. Some I've absolutely loved. Some have just been okay. And we're going to chat about that. So if you're looking for some books, we're going to be talking about all kinds of different subjects too, all kinds of different books. So today, let's see, I am at 82 books read for 2023 of my goal of 102 books. So I'm one book behind on my readings, my reading goal for this year, but I am doing really good. This will be my highest reading year in quite a long time. And if some of you are listening thinking, Jami, you've read 82 books this year, I don't understand. That is because Jason and I do really, really love reading. And so we do challenge each other. We set goals. Our goal right now, 104 books in the year, is 2 books a week. So that's a pretty steady pace for us, but it's not an undoable pace. A couple of years ago, we hit our goal of 104 books and we thought, oh, well, we're going to increase this because we did so great this year. So we set our goal at 3 books a week, which is 156 books. Or did we do 4? No. Whatever it is. Yeah, that must be 3 books a week. Yeah. So we set that goal, and then we both did abysmal that year. We read like 70 or 80 books, which I mean is still fantastic, but we didn't even get anywhere close to our goal. So I feel like our reading time really does depend on the year, the season of life you're in, how good you're feeling throughout the year. And again, if you get into that habit of reading, it just clicks and starts happening more and more. So some of you read way more than I do. Some of you are thinking, hey, I'm just happy if I can get through a book a month. And some of you are really wanting to read more. But what I want to encourage you is that reading more is so good for your brain, for everything. It makes me a better mom. It makes me a better wife. It makes me, it really fills me up. Now, I am an introvert. I'm an introvert, so the best night I can think of is curling up on the couch with a cup of tea, the fire crackling, and a good book. Like, that is my idea of a wonderful Friday night. If you're an extrovert, if you're not quite as happy to be alone with your own thoughts, you just may not naturally read quite as much. And I really do think a big part of that is personality. I enjoy reading a lot. But no matter your personality, no matter the season of life, there is so much that we can get out of reading. Reading can just nourish our brains, nourish our whole bodies. And it's something that I think we should all be investing in, no matter what your reading goal is, whether it's 104 books in the year or 12 books for the year. And I want to encourage you in today's episode to just pick up a book and start reading. Because even me, who loves reading, who can read 100 books in a year, if I get out of the habit of reading, that's when it gets really hard. That's when you get out of it and you just don't pick anything up, and it's really tough. So if you are finding yourself in a season where you're completely out of reading, I am encouraging you to just pick up one book. Pick up a single book and start reading. You don't have to make this big, grand master goal list of what you're going to read. Pick up one book and start reading. And if you do that and you just determine that you're going to read 1 chapter a day, pretty easily over a month, you're going to read a book or 2 books. So that's my encouragement to you. If you are wanting to read more, pick a book. Most books are going to have about 10 to 15 chapters. This book right here has 13 chapters. This book, and we'll talk about these. I'm going to share what my latest reads are. This book has 11 chapters. So we're talking nonfiction. Most nonfiction books are going to be about there. We've got this chapter. This book has 11 chapters. So if I took any of these 3 books right here that are just random ones I had, and I read 1 chapter a day, all I have to do is find 11 days this month that I can read one chapter, and we're talking 10 or 15 minutes. And over the course of that month, you're very easily going to be able to read one book. Now, if you committed over the course of 30 days to read one chapter every single day, you're very, very easily going to get through 2 to 3 books. And we're talking a 10 to 15 minute commitment. So a lot of times people are like, Jami, how do you find the time to read? I never have any time. And yet you're very easily spending 10 to 15 minutes a day on Instagram, scrolling, whatever kind of some of that time waster, playing a game on your phone. There are 10 to 15 minutes somewhere that you can read. I promise you. So set aside those 10 to 15 minutes and just read one chapter. And it can feel daunting to get back into reading and think, I'm going to read this book, and you just never pick it up. No, set a timer. You don't even have to read a chapter. Set a timer for 10 minutes. And you're going to read for those 10 minutes, especially if you're feeling like I'm tired, I can't focus on the book, I'm having a hard time getting into it. Set a timer for 10 minutes and just start reading. Read for that 10 minutes and just give yourself 10 minutes a day. Give yourself 10 minutes a day, a couple times a week, and you are going to move through some books, which is that's what our goal is. Doesn't matter what the goal is, but be in books, be reading, be nourishing yourself as a whole person. And the other side of that is I do think that cell phones and Instagram and Reels and 10-second content, I think it has absolutely destroyed our ability to function, to read long form content. We're used to skimming. We're used to getting content fast, and books take our mind retraining to read at a slower pace, to read through some things that are harder. Jason and I make it a point to read through theology books together. And some of these books are dry and they are hard. And those are not the books I'm reading all day, every day. But those are the books that I do want to spend a few minutes a day reading and stretch my mind and have that concentration. Even a book here like The Time-Saving Mom. This is a very readable book. It's very easy to get into. It's not hard. Crystal does a lot of stories. So it's an easy one. But if your brain is so trained for 10-second Instagram reels and fast content and skimming, it might be hard to pick up an actual book and read. And yet that is what is so important, that we train not only our own minds, but we are modeling this to our children on how we actually read books. I want to raise readers. Well, to raise readers, I need to model reading. I need to model that. And so that's part of mine too, is I want my kids to see me picking up actual books and reading them. Okay, so as we are rounding out 2023, we're in the home stretch for Jason and I both of picking our final books for the rest of this year. And we're nerds, so we really like doing this. We've got like stacks of books on our nightstand, and it's an exciting thing to look at my to be read list and get excited about that. You might not get as excited about reading, and that's fine. But we are talking about like our final books for this year, and I'm really hopeful that the pace that I have been on, I will be able to finish this year's goal of 104 books. If I don't hit it though, I'm completely fine. I'm so happy with the amount I've read this year. And really the only reason that Jason and I set goals is because it does self-motivate. For me anyway. If I know that I'm supposed to read 2 books a week, when I sit down on Saturday night and I want to put a show on or pick up my phone, I'll be like, well, I only have 3 chapters left in my book and I'm supposed to finish it. So it motivates me to pick up a book, which is what I want to do with my time. But sometimes it's hard to actually pick up the book and read it. And so the goal just helps motivate me to do what I want to do with my time anyway. The goal does not feel like a noose around my neck that I have to like, oh, now I have to read my book. It's just motivating me to do what I want to do anyway. And so there are years where I don't hit my goal, and that's fine because I chose to use my time in a different way. I have been quilting a lot more lately. And so I've been listening to audiobooks. I was also watching a TV show instead while I was quilting. And that's fine because I was using my time intentionally how I wanted to. So if I get a little bit behind on my reading goal, that's fine because I'm still using my time intentionally in a way that I want to, that I think is a good productive use of time and rest time. And so I want to encourage you to set a goal that feels motivating to you, that doesn't feel demoralizing because don't say you're going to read 500 books this year if you haven't picked up a book in 3 years, but set a goal that's going to stretch you. So set a goal of, I'm going to read 12 books this year. If you feel like you pick up books kind of every once in a while, you're not really sure, I want to encourage you to start tracking your reading. I use the app called Storygraph, Goodreads is another good one where you can just put your books in and track. It's the only way I have any idea how many books I've read this year. And I would encourage you to start tracking how many books you read. And if you're one of those that just kind of picks up random books here and there, then maybe set a goal of 2 books per month, because that's a steady pace of reading, but it's a pretty doable pace still. Like we said, 1 chapter a day with a couple of breaks in there in a month, and you easily can finish 2 nonfiction books of average length. Of course, there are some books that are much, much longer. Okay, so like I said, I've really been enjoying my reading this year. And the last couple of months, I've been hitting some really good nonfiction books. So I still do read a lot of fiction. And the beginning of this year, I was reading way more fiction. So what my reading tends to be year after year is about 70% nonfiction. 70% nonfiction, which is, I don't know what you call, like, I guess self-help. I don't really read self-help, but like the time-saving mom. It's like, productivity. I read productivity books, theology books, homeschool books, biographies, all kinds of different nonfiction. So that usually tends to be about 70% of my reading per year, and about 30% is fiction. And that is pretty much year over year. This year, I realized at about July, I was, for probably the first time ever, I was very flopped on that. I was about 70% fiction and 30% nonfiction, which is fine. However, I do want to make sure that I'm having a very steady diet of nonfiction. I want to be reading primarily theology, Christian books, books that are helping me to dig into God's word, that are diving into different theological topics. I want to I think that's the best way to grow. I think you can actually grow through fiction. Fiction can actually be educational. It can be good for your soul. I mean, stories are good for your soul. Or they can be. They also can be bad for your soul. And so but I want to have a really steady diet of nonfiction. But I just kind of had gotten out of the habit. I was reading a lot of fiction books that were longer, like 5 to 7 book series for fiction, which just kind of, once you finish one and start the next, that's a lot of books. And so at about July, I realized I am going to take a break from fiction, and I'm going to just dive into some of these nonfiction I've really been wanting to get into. So what I'm going to share today are some of my recent nonfiction reads and how I've been liking them. So let's start right here with this one that is right here on my list. This is The Time-Saving Mom: How to Juggle a Lot, Enjoy Your Life, and Accomplish What Matters Most. This is Crystal Payne's most recent book. I want to say it came out at the beginning of this year, but now I can't remember. So I did read this. My name is right there. It's always fun to see your name in print. Okay, so I was trying to see when she published this. So I read this book probably about a year ago. It says it came out in 2023. So I think it came out at the beginning of this year. I read it probably about a year ago. I think I read it in the fall of last year because Crystal asked if I would write an endorsement. If I enjoyed the book, if I would write an endorsement, which I have absolutely loved every single other one of her books. So I was like, yes, please send me the manuscript, because I already know I will write you an endorsement, because I find her books to be so motivating and so practical. And I knew a book called Time-Saving Mom was going to be worth it. It's not just for moms. Her brand is Money Saving Mom. So that's why there's the mom in there. But I mean, it really applies to everybody. So here, let's see what I said. I will tell you what I think about this book. So I said, I often get asked how I manage my time and juggle so many responsibilities. I've long wanted a great resource to direct them to. And now I finally have something I can hand them and say, read this amazing book. Crystal will walk you through it all. So right there, that's what it says. But this book is fantastic. So I read this about a year ago, and it's been on my nightstand now to reread, because there's some really practical formulas for figuring out time management, for using your time well. And I wouldn't say this book is like the most earth-shattering, groundbreaking book in all of human history, but just the real practical encouragement and bits of advice that Crystal gives is fantastic. So it's been sitting on my list. I read like my printed out PDF version that she sent me last year. I've not actually read my hardcover copy. So this one is going to be the next nonfiction that I pick up. But because I read it last year, I can tell you this one is worth it. Okay. So that one's a new one I'm reading. This one I'm just finishing up. This is called The Core: Teaching Your Child the Foundations of Classical Education, from Lee Bortons. So she is the, creator, CEO, something of Classical Conversations, which is a homeschool curriculum program thing. We do not do Classical Conversations I'm not in the classical conversations world, but we do add elements of classical education into our homeschool. I'm a very Charlotte Mason classical education blend. And so I just love reading widely on homeschool, philosophical, educational. No, that's what it is. Homeschool educational philosophies. And so this was my latest one that I picked up. I feel like there was some helpful parts. Overall, not my favorite book, but some interesting things to think through. So yeah, she has a whole series along these lines. I don't know if I will read them all, but I do enjoy reading. I with homeschool, especially in all life, but especially homeschool, I like to read very widely and take bits and pieces from here and there that I enjoy, that I want to incorporate into my homeschool. So I'm actually just wrapping up this book. I have not marked this one off yet. So I will be marking another book off very soon. I need to just sit down and finish this one. Another book. So I haven't started this one yet. Jason has read this book. And when he was telling me about it, I was like, I want that book, but he read it as an ebook. And or he listened to it as an audio. And I was like, no, I want the physical one because I want to take notes in it. So it's called Conception Control: Avoiding Antinomianism and Legalism. So it's all about fertility and how we should view children. And Jason and I are gearing up to do a whole podcast or a podcast series on this exact topic. So this book is going to be great. Jason really, really loved it reading through it. And so this is going to be the next one. We just got this in the mail today. So I'm going to be reading through this and I will give you guys my thoughts because we'll do a full podcast episode pretty soon. And so if you are kind of struggling with, so here's the back of it. It says, is conception control part of the dominion mandate? If so, are there limits to man's dominion? In what ways did the fall impact the conception portion of the dominion mandate? In what ways does redemption impact conception? May a couple seek medical help in order to conceive? Are there limits to what medicine can ethically achieve in conception? Are there sexual practices within marriage that the Bible prohibits? How does one's view of conception control and birth control impact other areas of life? So we have found this to be a very balanced approach. And so far, at least what Jason's saying, it's really good. So I will tell you when I jump into it. Okay, so my other ones I've got here in my story graph because I don't have these physically in front of me. So I just recently read All Creatures Great and Small, which is by James Herriot. So if you have not watch the show on PBS. They had an old show in the 1970s, but they have remade it now. Actually, the show is like a prequel to the show in the 70s. I've never seen the 70s show, but I want to now after this. And we have James Herriot's Treasury for Kids. We've had that one for years. And that's been one of our most favorite, just beloved books in our household is that Treasury for Kids. So James Herriot was a vet in the 1920s, 30s, and beyond. And he just has these amazing stories of being a vet in England. And the Treasury for Kids is a beautiful picture book with all of these just amazing stories. So a couple of years ago, when I heard that PBS was making a new show, we were like, we have to try it. And it's one of our family's favorite shows. We watch it together. So I went back and I was like, I want to read his original 6 books that are his, they're autobiographical, which I'm sure he takes some liberties in. But basically the first book follows the first season of the new show. So I just finished listening to this. I listened to it as an audio. It was absolutely fantastic, especially if you have watched the show. I feel like I could just picture everything. And it was really fun. So this was a fiction book, but kind of feels like nonfiction biography, historical fiction, kind of all blended in together. All right. I also just read the book Standing on the Promises by Doug Wilson. So it's a Handbook of Biblical Child Rearing is what they call it. But I felt like it was really, really helpful. It talks about discipline. It talks about setting boundaries. It talks about teaching little ones to obey and the importance of that. And then also as they're entering middle school and teen years, how we actually really need to relax and let them start to have freedom to choose. So just really, really very balanced view. And I felt like it was actually really super practical and so many great takeaways that I was like, Jason, you got to read this one next. Okay, the next book I read was The Hormone Reset Diet. This one I'm really split on. So it's How to Heal Your Metabolism to Lose Up to 15 Pounds in 21 Days. But I read her original book, the hormone, I think it was just called The Hormone Reset. It was really, really helpful for hormones. But she definitely is not coming from the same worldview as I would be. And so there's definitely some interesting tidbits throughout this book. And I disagree with her approach to carbohydrates. I think women actually need a lot of carbohydrates and really, really good sources. I think whole grains are our friends. And so it was interesting, but there was just definitely a lot that I just did not quite agree with. So I don't know. I don't really have a recommendation for you on that one. All right. The next book I read was The 5 Lies of Our Anti-Christian Age by Rosaria Butterfield. This is a new book by Rosaria. It is amazing. If you've not read Rosaria's other books, you need to read every single one. You know what? Let's see what her books are called. Okay. So she has The Gospel Comes with a House Key, which is her book on hospitality. And it's amazing. And then this is not bringing up her other books in here, but she has 2 other books that are like autobiographical that are very, very interesting. She was a lesbian. What was her title? She was a professor at a university. There's a title there that I cannot think of. And she was saved and came out of that world. And it's just her story telling about all that. And then this new book, 5 Lies of Our Anti-Christian Age, builds just more upon what we need to be aware of as Christians in this world. And I mean, it is absolutely fantastic. It's a book that every Christian needs to read. Jason read it first and was like, yeah, you need to read this one. I didn't even realize Rosaria had a new book out, and it's really good. And I've read all of her books now. So go read those old ones. And then my next book, I told you I've kind of been all over the place, is Art for God's Sake, A Call to Recover the Arts by Philip Graham Ryken. I will put a list in the show notes for today so you guys can see these. You don't have to keep track of them all. Art for God's Sake was really, really interesting. I do think we need to recover the arts. I think Christians should be leading the charge when it comes to art and culture and music and architecture, and we've lost so much of that. And I think this is a great take on why we actually need artists within the Christian community, why it's important to support them, that we can make absolutely incredible things, and why it is for God's sake. And it's a tiny, tiny, tiny little book, but the arguments he sets up in it are fantastic. All right, my next book is the new book by Sally Clarkson. A lot of people have been talking about this book, so I listened to the audiobook, which is read by Sally, and it's called Tea Time Discipleship, Sharing Faith One Cup at a Time. This was a really sweet book. It's just about how we can use tea time to minister to our own family and also to other people. She shares recipes throughout. I definitely think it would be a book that would be more fun to own the physical copy of, because she does have those recipes throughout and those different tips. It definitely read more like a coffee table book where each chapter was pretty disjointed from each other. It wasn't a cohesive nonfiction book, but it's done that way on purpose. It's meant to be each chapter is its kind of own thought. It has a recipe with it. So just a really sweet book. Especially we're doing a lot of prayer and thought right now on hospitality, which has always been a huge passion of ours that we're really getting back into finally after having our last baby. And so it was a sweet book. So if you've read Sally Clarkson books before, you'll pretty much know what to expect. And it was good. It would make a good gift for somebody. All right. My next book is A History of the World in 6 Glasses by Tom Standage. All right. This book was so interesting. I listened to it as an audiobook, which was awesome. I listened to it on Scribd, and the reader was great, and it was really, really interesting. Tom Standage has a whole bunch of other books that I'm really, really excited to read. So it's A History of the World in 6 Glasses. Let's see what the description is. No, I can't remember what they are. Okay, so beer, wine, spirits, coffee, tea, and Coca-Cola. In Tom Standage's deft, innovative account of world history, these 6 beverages turn out to be much more than just ways to quench thirst. They also represent 6 eras that span the course of civilization, from the adaptation of agriculture to the birth of cities to the advent of globalization. A history of the world in 6 glasses tells the story of humanity from the Stone Age to the 21st century through each epoch's signature refreshment. So it's going through how the world, how trade, how civilizations were really built through these different drinks. And there was so interesting on beer in ancient Egypt. I didn't know so much of this. Wine, obviously, he's talking about Greece and Italy. We're talking about ancient Rome, ancient Greece. It talks about coffee and tea in more modern times, but still old for us. Establishing trade lines globally. It talks about Coca-Cola, the role that Coca-Cola played in World War I. Oh my gosh, it's just like so interesting to see the history through that. Now, this guy is not a Christian, absolutely is not coming from our worldview. So just take that with a grain of salt, that there's some just things that you kind of roll your eyes at. And then like 95% of the book, I was like, this is really interesting. And this last bit, he just gets into some really wacky stuff right at the end about climate change and how, man, ultimately we're going to have to end up living on Mars and not on Earth. Just some stuff that was like, and it felt so disjointed. Like at the end, I was like, dude, what are you talking about? So it was just weird at the end, but it was really, really interesting. And I just started his book. He has a book on, what does he call it? What is it called? Let me see if I can find it. I think it's in Scribd. Okay. No, I'm pulling up the wrong book. Okay. It is called The Victorian Internet, The Remarkable Story of the Telegraph and the 19th Century Online Pioneers. So this is a book all about the telegraph, and he calls it the Victorian Internet. So that one's been really interesting. So I love reading history books. I just think that they're so interesting. And so this has been another really fun one. So I told you, I've been like kind of all over the place when it comes to reading. I was just looking through some of his other books. Anyway, so his are really, really interesting. I have another book here, actually. This whole series, if you're not familiar with this series, The Backyard Homestead, favorite series on homesteading ever. Like the set of these books, I want to say there's 5 or 6 of them. They're all absolutely incredible. I have another one right here. Okay. This is The Backyard Homestead Book of Kitchen How-To, Field to Table Cooking Skills. This one is the guide to raising farm animals. Probably 12, 13 years ago when I started getting really, really interested into these topics, I bought the whole set. The first book is called just The Backyard Homestead. And I read these books all cover to cover. They're absolutely amazing. And so I am deep in the trenches of writing units 3 and unit number 4 for our Sterling Spectacles homeschool units that are all about homesteading. Unit 3 is on farm animals, and unit 4 is your homestead kitchen. So these have been really, really good resources to just kind of have out open when I'm like, okay, I'm writing about meat rabbits. I need some inspiration. So these ones are these are fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So a big part of, I could do a whole talk, actually. We should do a podcast episode on building up our library at home and the intention that we have behind that. We don't buy everything. We don't have everything. A lot of books I read are audio. They are ebooks because we are trying to, not spend $1 million. So we do have a very strict book budget. I almost said food budget. That too. And so there are books though, like Jason read this for free first through Scribd. And then we were like, no, this is one that we want to own, that we want to have in our library. And there's a lot of others that I read that were like a good read, but I'm not buying them and putting them into our library. But these types of books are ones that we want to have in our library. We want to have books that our kids can just pick up and read. For example, I have a book on raising meat rabbits that I got a couple years ago. I read it cover to cover. Well, now my older kids are old enough to start getting interested in these topics. So one of my sons the other day, in our afternoon for our school, we just kind of have like free time where you can explore different topics. Some of our kids will do coding. He's not into coding. And so he was like, Mom, what should I do? And I was like, well, you really want us to get meat rabbits soon. So why don't you like watch some videos? So he watched this whole like hour-long video on raising meat rabbits. He was super excited. And I was like, well, guess what? And I walked over to our shelf that's got all my practical books like these. I pulled out the meat rabbits book and he was so excited. He took it and then he's been reading it and taking notes ever since. This is my kid who absolutely wants to be a farmer when he grows up. And so I love we're not going to be able to have books on every subject ever. And we easily could have, if I didn't have a book like that, we easily could have gotten a book from the library on that topic. But building up a practical library is very important to our family. And so I should do a future podcast episode on that. But speaking of, Jason's actually right now, he took the little 2 kids with him to go rent to the library because I have like 7 books on hold at the library on, this is super random, on punch needle embroidery. I have recently discovered that you can make absolutely beautiful, incredible heirloom quality rugs with punch needle. It's my new obsession. So I'm currently obsessed with quilting. And I already told Jason, I have all these quilting projects. In fact, I need to do it tonight. I have all these quilting projects that I am going to get done for Christmas. I have a quilt for each child that needs to get done and my Christmas quilt. And I am like, it is happening. I also recently decided I'm quilting stockings for us for Christmas. And it's October 17th. Okay, so I have a lot of work to do. My point is, I have been deep in learning quilting. And when I first really got into quilting, I checked out like 20 books from the library. Some of them were not worth it at all. Some of them I read through. I read this really cool history of quilting in America. Just really, really cool because it's this new subject that I'm interested in. So when I recently, just last week, discovered that I could make these incredible rugs, I told Jason, this is my project starting January. I'm going to do all my quilting projects and I'm doing this. And he was like, okay. So I got all the books at the library that they had, all the ones that looked good. He's picking them up for me and I'm going to spend my weekend reading through and looking through these different books to really see, is this something that I can do, that I have the interest in, that I think I could actually really get into. Thankfully, punch needle is a super inexpensive thing to get into. So I'm not going to start by trying to make a massive rug. I'm going to start by making something very little first before I get into all of that. And I think, and I'm excited for it. So I want to encourage you to find things that you're excited about. Read about homeschooling. If you're a homeschool mom and you feel like you're just constantly like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this enough? How is this? Start reading books on homeschool educational philosophy, because you're going to start realizing the things that you believe and the things that you and your husband believe and how you want to play that out in your home. If you're interested in learning how to cook, there's so many incredible cookbooks. There's so many great books out there. If you're interested in homesteading, if you want to look into theology more. So this is another question. This is another great podcast episode we could do. We have shared that over the last 3 to 4 years, we've had quite a few theological shifts. Paedobaptism, we've really dug into eschatology, head covering. There's so many topics that we have explored that, whether you head cover or you don't head cover, do you know that scripture talks about head covering? So what do you think? If you think that the Bible's arguing that you wear them, why do you think that? If you think the Bible that's not what it's saying, why do you think that? You need to have a clear biblical backup for why you think that. And so I think diving into different theological topics is fantastic. There's so many great ways that we can grow and learn. And there's so many things that I will just never get to because there's not enough time. But reading, getting books. I mean, even like some of these books, you don't have to read cover to cover if you're not an absolute nerd like I am. But they're great books to skim through. They're great books to get for your kids. I mean, look how just fantastic. I just love this series. They're amazing. You also can get our Homestead homeschool units if you want. Just go to sterlingspectacles.com. But anyway, so I'm going to wrap up now because I could end up talking about books forever. So what I was going to say though is Jason and I want to do an episode where we talk about like navigating theological change as a couple, and also what steps we took because we researched a lot every single theological thing. We end up researching a lot. And it's kind of one of those where you're like, okay, right now we're researching this really in depth. We're reading books, we're listening to sermons, we're reading the Gospels over and over again, and really diving into this one thing. What does Jesus say about the end times? Let's really dive into that. And then, you're kind of like, okay. And then you move on to the next thing and do a deep dive. And so we've had a lot of people asking, how do you do that? How do you navigate that? What do you do if you disagree? And that would be another great podcast episode that I'd love to do in the future. So if you have any other thoughts kind of along these lines, please let us know which topics you'd like, because we're actually developing our 2024 schedule right now for the podcast. So let us know which ones you want to see us cover. All right. Well, I'm going to be done today. You guys can find the links to all of these down below of just kind of some of my latest reads. Thank you guys for listening in, and we'll see you guys back here next week for the next episode.